welcome to today's event, Bristol and Beyond, a Mayor on the World Stage. We are so thrilled to have Mayor Marvin Rees here to talk about all of his hard work at the city and the global level, and Penn's own Professor Eugenie Birch to ask some hard-hitting questions about cities and their role in policymaking, since we know Bristol is not alone. Cities are playing an increasing role in policy debates about climate change and migration, among many other issues, and have been on the front line of COVID response and economic recovery, which is why we're so excited for this conversation today. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us here today and with our audience. Mayor Marvin Rees was elected mayor in May 2016, and among his many achievements in office, has delivered over 8,000 homes, announced the development of a mass transit system, provided quality work experience for over 3,500 children, successfully bid to bring Channel 4 to Bristol, and is leading the city's response to both the climate and the ecological emergencies facing our world today. He also developed a one city plan for Bristol, which incorporated the UN Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, into plans for a fair, healthy, and sustainable city by 2050. With his election, Bristol also became the first major European city to have elected a Black African heritage mayor. He holds 2 master's degrees in political theory and government and in global economic development, and has been a good friend to Perry Worldhouse throughout our work, and a former resident of Philadelphia, I just learned today. Mayor Rees is joined by Professor Eugenie Birch, who is the Lawrence C. Nussdorf Professor of Urban Research and Education and a faculty lead for our Global Shifts theme here at Perry Worldhouse. She teaches courses in planning history and global urbanization, serves as chair of the graduate group in city and regional planning, and is founding co-director of the Penn Institute for Urban Research. She was also chair of UN Habitat's World Urban Campaign and is currently the president of the General Assembly of Partners. She's also been involved extensively in the Urban 20 or U20 work this year. And in true urban fashion, I've got lots of sirens going on outside my window here. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to you, Eugenie. And we've got your first, you're on mute, Eugenie.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for welcoming us, and thank you for Perry Worldhouse for having this wonderful session. We're so honored to have Mayor Rees with us. I don't think I need to say anything more, but ask him to come speak and tell us about some of the thoughts he has today in the world that we're living. Mayor Rees.
Thanks very much. Marvin's fine once we start as well. So, yeah, no, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be able to link up because, as I'll share, I did live in the area for over nearly 2 years. I lived first in Philadelphia and King's Essing, then moved out to the main line, lived in St. David's. So just for your geography, Bristol's a city of about 500,000 people. It's about 100 miles, 120 miles from London to the west, just on the border with South Wales. So we are about 40 miles from the capital of Wales. Puts 2 core cities, 2 of the biggest cities in the UK, just 40 miles apart from each other. It's a port city, and that has been a source of great wealth to the city. It's why it's grown up. Originally set up by the Romans back in the day, but it's grown up through its port wealth, and so that's always made it a very international city. It was a key route on the triangular slave trade, and we have a connection to Philadelphia because Penn Senior is interned in St. Mary Redcliffe Church. Here in Bristol as well, so there's the historical connection between our 2 cities as well. So yeah, it's a thriving city. It's well known nationally and internationally as well. When I was elected, I did not come in with an intention to do lots of international work. Now, clearly, I'm interested. I lived in Washington. I lived in Philadelphia. I lived in, and my wife is American. I met when I was over there as well. I have a lot of Jamaican families, that's what they call them, Jamaicans who settled in America. So we are international by nature, but I didn't come in with an international agenda. But what's happened is it's become increasingly apparent that you cannot deliver on a city level unless we are operating internationally, whether that be supporting trade and tackling the issues that we face today. And it wasn't too long before I came to a broader conclusion that we need to move global governance into its next iteration. And that iteration will involve the leaders of cities and networks of cities as equal partners in shaping national and international policy. There are 3 provocations I offer. I just thoughts I might be wrong, but I'll offer them nonetheless. I think that's okay. First off, we need that governance to change. We need that shift of sovereignty because of what cities actually are. With most of the world now living in cities, we need the governance to reflect what cities are as separate from national governments. We are international. Bristol is a city of 92 languages, 180 countries of origin, 45 religions. What is happening in Nigeria is of immediate concern to Bristolians. What's happening in Pakistan is of immediate concern to people here. I got in a taxi once, my taxi driver was Somali. They were very interested in what was going on in Minneapolis, where there was another very large Somali population, their family were there. So we think, well, I'm not thinking zero sum, I'm thinking about our interdependence and our shared interests. Secondly, I think that the nature of the challenges we're facing in the world today cannot be met by national governments working alone. They're just not equipped to come up with the dynamism, the speed of action, the innovation, or even a democratic mandate that's so distant from ordinary life, I believe. So if we take an issue like migration, for example, cities exist because stuff moves, people, culture, money, finance, goods and services. I've got a government at the moment here, and you had one there, that's one of the big narratives was building walls and separation. The success of Bristol can only be maintained if we keep things moving, people, culture, finance, goods and services. So we've got a different perspective there on that. On climate change, what I don't want is the COP negotiations next year to be national governments making declarations that they don't have the ability to enact with other national governments. I want cities to be at the table, because it's at the city level that we build homes that are zero carbon or not, plan transport routes that decarbonize or not, have energy systems that are decarbonised or not. So the delivery level is at the city. Cities can no longer be a topic to be discussed at international gatherings. They have to be there as equal partners in the driving seat. I do not mean getting rid of national governments. I'm not saying that at all. But we need more city voice as city voice and collections of cities. Finally, another thought that's been on my mind a lot recently, it may be a bit of a Lord of the Rings issue here. But you put the ring in the safest place. And at the moment, I think we do need to be safeguarding our sovereignty and our democracy and putting it in the safest place. And I think that national governments, national political structures have shown themselves quite vulnerable to unsavory kind of political motivations. And maybe one of the safest places to begin putting sovereignty is at the local city level. I'm not saying it's perfect at the city level, but the proximity to people, the dynamism, the diversity, the multidimensional identities perhaps give us access to a better quality of discussion about who we are and where we're going.
Well, thank you very much for your worldview here. Very, very challenging in terms of what we would need to do to accomplish what you are suggesting. For example, the issue of national government and having cities as equal partners is one that I think many of the people on this podcast are listening to and certainly would agree with. However, if we look at the behavior of national governments recently and in the immediate past, we would see that they're not ready to accept us, cities, as equal partners. I'm going to reference right now the communique for the G20, which just came out Sunday night. Not one mention of cities or urban or subnational government. Clearly, they're dealing with the pandemic, as we all are, and clearly the front lines of the pandemic are at the city level. And there's simply not one mention of that in the whole document. How do you respond to that? How do we get national governments to consider what you are suggesting?
So we need to continue to make the case. I've just come off a call today. I was testifying at a parliamentary committee and just making this point. In many ways, government was like a drowning person who cannot swim and is being overwhelmed by the, this is a very bad image maybe, but is being overwhelmed by the water around them. But the best thing they can do to save themselves and save everyone else is just relax and allow some other people to put some energy into it. But there's a lack of self-awareness. Certainly in the UK, it feels like the MPs and the Whitehall machine believe that the answer is in a room with some clever people down there. And they just will not make any space for any other ideas to come forward. So I think there are politicians who are enlightened on this front. And maybe it's certainly maybe on the more progressive side of politics, when we look at what's happened in the United States, I would expect that the leadership of US mayors in the face, I'm declaring my fact, I clearly wouldn't be aligned with Trumpian politics, but the leadership of US mayors and what I thought was the source of sanity in US politics would be recognized by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and they would begin to recognize the need to shift and look at greater prominence for US mayors, and certainly in the UK, we'd hope so. So that's going to be an ongoing discussion. But there are three other sources of potential change. One is the cities themselves, and cities are organizing into the international networks, whether or not government support it. So we're going to Brexit at the end of December. I was talking to Annalisa Bonnet, who's the Secretary General of Eurocities, the big European network of cities. We said we should do our own cities conference in January. Don't worry about government. Whatever comes out of Brexit, let's organize ourselves and look for those opportunities. So cities can self-organize. You've got the geographical based networks like US Conference of Mayors and Eurocities and Core Cities, but you have the issue-based networks like C40, Mayors Migration Council as well. Secondly, I think business can talk about this. Business need open borders to do business. If national governments are pulling us apart, there is a voice from business that says, actually, if we work city to city and networks of cities, we can facilitate international trade despite national governments pulling us apart. So there's a very strong voice to be had there. And the last I'd think about were organizations like the UN and the World Bank, talking directly to cities. Historically, they've talked to governments, but making sure that cities are at the table when they convene their gatherings and that they're consulting with them and trying to work through them directly as well.
Have you tried to talk to the World Bank and the UN as a city person?
Yeah.
The mandate of the World Bank is to operate with nations, not cities. They can't even give a loan to you without your national guarantee. So we have so many structures that have to be broken down. I certainly agree with you about the strength of the city networks and the strength of private sector being able to circumvent some of the really post-World War II organization that is dominating international work and national work and so forth. But when you talk about trade, it's the nations that set up the tariffs, the nations that set up the borders, trade and migration and so forth. I mean, it's finding that niche and the breakthrough pieces that will come from these networks, but I'm not sure what more we can do.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm an optimist. I'm just looking at all those sources of hope.
Well,
so
all right.
Yeah, so I'm just saying this is where I go. I just don't think it's easy, and you know, that concentration of power in the center is not something that's going to change very easily, is it? I'm not suggesting it is, but I see it. So we went, for example, I came over to the US last year. I brought over a load of our tech companies. We came over with our universities and our airport. We visited New York, Boston, and Chicago. There was university to university connection there. Actually, we were going to come to Philadelphia as well. There's university to university connection. And they're talking about how they get their business incubators to begin working and collaborating. Irrespective of what, well, not irrespective, but in the face of whatever borders are put up internationally, people will begin to drive for those opportunities. And I guess if there is a demand for policy change, and if that tide becomes stronger and stronger as we can begin to work it up, then there'll be, hopefully, one is it tunes national political ears into that need and begins to make change more likely rather than less likely. Organizations like the World Bank, you know, I recognize that. Again, they're set up for national governments. It was a US mayor that said to me, "We've the best 1960s model of international governments we could hope for. The problem is 2020."
Yeah,
you know, so yeah, so I was at the Chicago City Forum on a panel with a representative of the World Bank, and I raised this, and they said, actually, we recognize that we do need to start thinking about how we can work much more directly with cities. The fact they don't have the structures to do it at this point in time is the challenge. But the first need is for those organizations to begin recognizing that there's a gaping hole in their toolbox, right? That needs to be brought into play. Next question is, how do we make that? How do we equip them with all those levers they need?
Yeah, I think the groundswell approach is really, really important. And I hope you will continue to lead the charge here, because they will start listening as far as that goes. And they're the major structural changes that have to be worked with. We can't think of nations and cities being at odds with each other, but in partnership with each other. And I think your concept about the equal partners at the table is one that we have to continue working with. I'd like to now move to Bristol itself. You're in the middle of the second lockdown, correct? With the pandemic. So you've been working hard to communicate the importance of observing the rules. Your letter to the community on November 19th and your daily blogs really show how you've been trying to communicate the necessity of observing all of this. But can you tell us what's going on? How's it going? Can you get the kind of cooperation you need? And secondly, what are the economic impacts?
So cooperation in the city has been reasonable. Again, dare I say, there's a difference between an increasing frustration with national government and its distance, not helped by the fact that the former chief of staff to the prime minister broke the COVID rules themselves, and contracts go into friends of government. That's what it looks like. That doesn't create. But I think at the city level, there's a degree of trust. I mean, I live in the city. My kids go to local schools. They've been sent home. Mum's here. So there's a sense in which you can genuinely talk about us being in it together, and that helps. So our message has been: we know it's difficult, right? We know there are complexities. We know there's loneliness, isolation. We had a major theme over the summer. We run in Bristol something called the City Gathering every 6 months, where we pull city leaders together and we go through the kind of key challenges and opportunities for Bristol. The City Gathering we hosted in July was all about loss and just acknowledging loss, and not just death loss of jobs, loss of safety with the rise of domestic violence and child abuse, loss of financial security, and just did that. And I think it was a political event, but actually there was quite a lot of emotion in it as well. So we are getting compliance, I think, because but there's clearly a jadedness around that too. The economic impacts are very significant for us, and we've made this point since the beginning that we have to deal with the virus, but the consequences of dealing with the virus are always going to be severe for health, because health outcomes are determined by socioeconomic factors, primarily poverty, inequality, poor quality housing, homelessness. So we've had a doubling of our unemployment in the city, up to 4.5%. It's 20,000 people. We've had about 70,000 people furloughed. Cities are 466,000 people. So the presence has been huge. We're a big hospitality sector within the city, a lot of tourism in Bristol. That's been hit very, very hard. So it's taking a toll. And as we look at what we come out of the other end, how we come out of lockdown, is a very big concern as well. Because if we come out into what government calls tier 3, which is the strictest form of intervention below a lockdown, then it's still going to impact on our businesses. Can I just say at the same time, there's a lot of it's a very brutal time, but we've used in Bristol a proverb quite a lot, or I've used it and now it's used. We don't despise our sufferings, because suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. Now,
that's beautiful. Say that again. Say that again. It's really beautiful.
We don't despise our sufferings, because suffering produces perseverance, perseverance, character, and character, hope. It's a biblical proverb, right? But actually, it's true. It's been true in my life. My mum was a single white woman, 1970s, brown baby on the way, not the done thing, poor. We lived in a refuge for a little while before living on a housing estate, which is like the projects, and I didn't want to go through the things I went through as a child, but they are my source of strength today in many ways. And I think that's true for the collective as well. What we've had the opportunity to discover in Bristol has been a remarkable resilience in our human relationships. Thousands of people have turned out to volunteer, to shop, to collect pensions, to befriend lonely people. And we wouldn't have discovered that without the trial. I'm not saying, we've entered into some utopia, but right. We have seen that, and it's a real source of strength.
So what do you think will be the permanent after effects of this pandemic, the lockdown, and the responses and recovery?
Well, I don't know. It's contested. First off, I think that the status quo has shown itself remarkably adaptable and resilient over the years. So we have these momentous times when we think, right, everything's going to change, right? We've had 2 world wars that were supposed to change everything. You know, we had the Cold War, we had bring it up to date. We had the financial crisis of 2008, and what happens is we tend to patch and mend and go back to business as usual. So that would be a very powerful force in the world. I think there'll be an underlying trend, certainly in the UK and probably globally, of driving inequality. So the most marginal people will be hit first and hardest by the consequences of the economic downturn or depression that's coming our way. And they'll be least well placed to benefit from the support programs and any uplift when it comes. So there'll be an underlying drive, and I think that could be very dangerous if that wins out. But we also do have an opportunity to reinvent who we are. Every system in our city and our country is being tested right now. Our food system, you know, our transport system, our education system, with children being sent home, the strength of our economy, even our political system, in that the elections were postponed this year. So I got an extra year without an election, which is, my trolls are loving that. But I got an extra year, the elections are next year, so we couldn't even hold elections. So we have an opportunity, if we were to take it, to learn what was strong, learn what was weak, and build back, well, it's a cheap political phrase, but build back better, but it is right, to reinvent what we are and what we do so that we are more resilient to future shocks, but also reduce the likelihood, but reduce the contribution we make to the likelihood of future shocks. Which one of those wins out? I wouldn't make a bet at the moment.
Right. So I've heard you speak in other places, and one of the things you've talked about is the stress on your budget that this is creating. Can you give us a little enlighten us on how you're handling that?
Well, it's like trying to make bricks without straw. So the local authority budget, UK is one of the most centralized countries in Europe in terms of finance and policy making, right? It's Westminster and Whitehall grabbing a hold of leadership and not being able to imagine their way out of that. And that means they drip feed us money. So we kind of calculated about a £19 million hit on our local government budget, which is
what percent would that be?
Well, of about 380 million, but we've already stretched after 10 years of austerity. So what that results from is increased need, reduced revenues because people haven't been parking in our car parks, and then an inadequate financial settlement from government to make up for that. But we've also looked at the cost of the last lockdown, not just on local government finance, but the impact on the Bristol's economy. And we estimate it's about £54 million a month. And so that's not just financing local government, that's the cost of furlough, keeping people in work, the lost revenues for businesses, and the full financial package. We think we need to keep this city afloat. At the moment, national government are coming up with about 9 to 10 million. So we got £44 million shortfall for the city, not just for local government.
Right, right. So they say that the mayor is the best job to have in government, but sometimes it must be the hardest job to have in government, as you have to deal with that shortfall.
Yeah, well, it is. It's an interesting place to sit. I think the key thing is to get good people around you. So I've got some people around me who are much smarter than me, trying to work out how we sort this out.
Okay. Well, before the pandemic struck, you of course had the One Bristol Plan, and it's renowned worldwide for its addressing key issues and challenges that your city is facing. In fact, other cities are facing around the world. Will that still frame what you'll do, or are you going to adjust it in some way? What's the fate of the One Bristol Plan, do you think?
So just for background for this, is what we did was we pulled the city together. It's not just written by local government, but it's setting out where we want to be in 2050, what we want to be, and then under 6 particular storylines, I might call them strands: housing, health and well-being, education and skills, transport, economy and environment. what we need to deliver every year under each of those headings to be that thing in 2050. But you're allowed 3 things under each of those strands. So it's bringing some focus and a sequence of events. So the plan still stands because we still want to be what we want it to be. I want to be a city of hope, inclusive, sustainable, in which everyone has a part and shares in its success. We haven't been that historically. We still want to be that thing. So the vision stands. But the plan was never supposed to be concrete boots. We say at the beginning of it that it is not finished. It is an iteration. So every year we refresh the plan and it's rewritten. Some things will be major changes, some things will be subtle changes, but we refresh it every year, and it'll be refreshed in the light of COVID. So it becomes our post-COVID plan. But the element of the plan that really has come to the fore is not just the plan itself, but the relationships and the process we went through to build the plan. So it takes a lot to build the relationships of trust between organizations to begin speaking into each other and contributing to a shared vision. And what we found is that those relationships have begun to pay dividend. So when we were seeing the risk of people going without food, it did not take much to begin to mobilize the city to set up to kind of refresh our food distribution network that was focused on primary school children and direct it to housing. It just took a bit of a tinker. When we needed to recruit foster families, because a number of older foster families were at risk and could no longer foster children and they were beginning to potentially break down, it did not take much for us to go out through those existing relationships and networks and recruit about 50 foster families for our children. So it's the soft relationships that have really begun to pay off above and beyond specific policies that we've benefited from here.
That's an extraordinary lesson. What you did was set up the framework for achieving certain goals, but these goals changed a little bit given COVID, but you were able to use that framework to energize what you needed to address the current problems. That's huge.
Well, I think what people experience, they experience the benefits of working together. We've always known it in theory, but we never got a genuine product. And when we actually produced this one city plan that talks about carbon neutrality, reducing domestic violence, all in the same plan, carbon neutrality, domestic violence, active travel, recycling rates, levels of work experience for our children and young people. And people could see this plan working for them, but also importantly, recognizing interdependencies of the plan. So if we want outcomes in health and well-being, which the National Health Service want, we need to deliver housing. So the National Health Service had a chance to speak into our housing targets for Bristol, right? If we want better education and skills, we need housing, right? Children need a stable community to live in. The economy needs a well workforce, a mentally well workforce that's resilient. So actually they get to speak into the health and well-being strand. And also they speak into education strand because of that investment in mental health and well-being that goes on. So we created that space where you don't have to go on a big lobbying effort. You're part of a collective conversation. And I think that did build trust. So if I give you just one small example, as we went into lockdown, we had set up a pattern whereby I would host a breakfast for city leaders from the universities, from the unions, voluntary sector, faith groups, every 3 months. No agenda. I just did breakfast, put some coffees on. We cut the food because we didn't have the budget for it, but there you go. But we put coffees on.
Like the coffee.
Yeah. And we basically just shared some item, like a meaningful item, housing delivery or education. And then everyone got to say what was going on in their area and look at the interdependencies. Like transport was a big issue for the universities, for example, right? Well, as soon as the lockdown hit, I wrote to everyone, I said, should we start meeting weekly? They all said, yes, please. Now, I've offered them an out. Every Wednesday at 12:30, about 15 to 18 city leaders are on a call with me, getting a brief on COVID, but talking about their interdependencies. That's, again, I list them, universities. So we headed off potential tensions between schools going back and the unions, right? We knew schools were going to go back. We had the unions. Let's avoid the division that happened at a national level. Let's get the unions talking to the school leaders about the conditions for teachers to go back into the classroom. They had that chat. It wasn't a big epic event. It's just about being human.
Sure, exactly. So how long, you described this process of built the one Bristol Plan, which you're now maximizing with the weekly calls. When did you start it? How long did it take? And did you start from a situation where people were quite distrustful of government?
Oh, people are always distrustful of government, but I think, part of my life, I come from, I suppose, areas of deprivation and that my background. So I generally quite challenging. My mum still lives in the same house I moved to in 1978, right, on Stapleton Road. She's on this retired nursery nurse on a substandard pension. One of my points to city leaders is, my mum hasn't got time for you to indulge your cynicism. If you're paid over £100,000 a year, you need to get yourself around the table and come up with a solution. That's what you're there for, right?
I hope you bring your mother out too to say that.
Yeah, and also kind of like the activist community, I again, excuse my categorization here, but if you're a middle class activist role playing, living on the margins, but you don't really live on the margins, you're just, a climate activist. I don't have much patience for that. You've got to come up with some solutions, and we just drive people to solutions. In fact, I'd say we developed a culture. We called it make a big offer and then make a big ask. Don't just come to me and ask me for stuff. Come and make an offer to the city, and then tell me what you need from me to help you deliver that offer. If you just come with a shopping list of stuff, you're just like a toddler. I want to know what you're going to do for inequality, domestic violence, joblessness, to bring hope, to drive the city's ambition. And then I want to invest in people that want to get stuff done. I can line up 10,000 people that want something from me. The line of people that want to actually get stuff done for other people is a lot shorter, but that's where I need to put my efforts. We started it as soon as I was elected. I had the idea some years ago, to be honest, about writing one plan. And I thought one of the best things I could ever do for Bristol is to work with the city to develop a plan that transcended the electoral cycle. So the city could begin to think and plan over 15, 20, 50, 30 years, rather than, okay, let's restart our story every 4 years. So that's what we've tried to do.
So it's not the mayor's plan, it's the people's plan. And so the people will carry this forward when you go on to greater governmental levels, as far as that goes.
It's the city plan,
Yeah,
absolutely.
City plan, absolutely, that's really clever.
And people have said, what happens if you don't win the election? Well, I say, well, if I don't win the election, whoever comes in would have to go to the police, go to the health service, it's not me locking anyone in, because what's in the plan, I didn't write it. They'd have to go to all those sectors and say, I don't want to keep going with this work. And they'll be saying, we've been doing this for 5 years. We've been meeting, we've been working together. So it's not my plan. Although secretly, obviously, when it comes up to election time, if people like it, I want the credit for it. But I'm not saying that out publicly.
That's a balancing act. It's a balancing act, of course. And we'll vote for you if we could. And you've talked a lot about housing in our conversation, and that's been a big feature of what you've done, obviously, from your own experience and what you've seen in Bristol. How do you deal with issues of not in my backyard, if you're going to be building housing that some neighborhoods might not like, and is this intertwined with race? What if you had to deal with it in your housing portfolio?
Oh, there's big challenges on there.
Yes.
So I'll give you an example. I went to, there's an area called Hot Wells, and which is a very nice area, very, big houses. I guess many of those houses would have been owned by people who did well out of Bristol's mercantile past as well. They look over the harbour and just down from Clifton with views up the gorge and the suspension bridge. There's a flyover built there. It was built in the 1960s. It's horrific. And we can knock that down, remove the road or build a tunnel if possible, and probably fit 2,000 home units down there. Good quality, lovely, but good share affordable, 30-40% affordable. As a result of sharing that, which I thought people would welcome because it gets rid of a horrific road, I went to a community event in the church. They had to lock the doors. So many people were angry, not to keep them out, but they couldn't fit any more people in. So there's me on the stage by myself with about 400 local residents really angry about this proposal to build homes down there. many people started with the line, I've lived here for 30 years. I've had my house here for 35 years. I imagine this tweet will get around the world. But anyway, I do think to myself, well, good for you. We've got 12,000 people on the waiting list, 600 families in temporary accommodation. They haven't lived anywhere for 30 or 40 years, and we do need houses. So my point is that let's move upstream, and let's see if we can come to some agreement on the challenge we're trying to take on. Don't assume that I'm evil or I just want to destroy Bristol and destroy anyone's lives. What we've got to do is agree on what the challenge is. And so I just went through the argument. I said, do we all agree that we have a housing crisis in the city? Everyone agrees, right? We agree it's not acceptable to have 12,000 families on the waiting list, or households on the waiting list, children without stable homes, families in bed and breakfast. We agree that, right? We do agree that, okay. So the next challenge is we've got to meet that housing crisis in the face of both a climate and an ecological emergency, right? Well, people agree that. So that means that we need to build in the middle of the city, higher density, active travel distance to major employment, entertainment, retail offers, and people agree that. Right, well, if that's the aim, then let's start looking at the trade-offs. So like someone said to me, why can't you put these houses on the edge of the city? Well, I said, well, then you're building in carbon dependency. So let's just agree that it's a wickedly challenging world, it's complicated, there's going to be a price we have to pay for everything. And let's understand this is the challenge I'm taking on. Now, if you disagree with my solution, building houses here, what is your solution? Because then we've got to start dealing with the consequences of the solution you're putting on the table. And often the consequences of is building houses in the least sustainable place on the edge of the city. Well, then you've got to own that. And you've got to stand up in front of the city and own that you're not prioritizing housing and you're prepared to put your houses in unsustainable locations rather than just pointing out where I've fallen. And that's what I try to do with people, go upstream, not to attack them, but let's work out what we can agree on and work out the point of departure, and then work out how we navigate that. But at least accept the fact that we're not evil. We're just trying to solve problems in a wickedly complicated world.
So then what happened?
Well,
the doors are locked. Talking to the folks.
Well, what happened in the actual meeting was, rather than me giving a speech at the beginning, I sat there while people basically made their points for about 50 minutes. And at the end, right. I made notes of all their points. I read their points out to them back. Where there were inaccuracies, I did suggest there were inaccuracies, and then set out the framework within which we're trying to solve the city's problems. Bristol has a housing crisis today. It's the least affordable of all the core cities. The city's going to grow by 100,000 people over the next 25 years. If we do not solve the housing crisis, I suggest that's going to come knocking at people's doors at some point, whether they're stepping over people in the street or there are housing riots because people can't afford to live in the city. There are consequences to everything. And the point was, inaction is not an option. So of all the actions we have to take, which action do you think is the best, both for you and Bristol as a whole? And you have to own the consequences of the position you take. Too often people have a position and don't own the consequences. It's a tweeted statement or a Facebook post or a placard, but there's a cost to everything. And we just try to make sure people contend with the fullness of their argument.
And housing is such an emotional issue, such an emotional issue.
But people need houses for their children as well, which is what we also remind people. You can't freeze frame a city at any point in time. What we need to do is the best quality, most sustainable, most pro-life, pro-nature community housing development that we can. But in the end, I spoke for 15 minutes and I had to go home to my children. And then you see the way that sometimes activism works. Someone said, well, he couldn't even be bothered to hang around to talk to us. I said, yeah, I'm the mayor, but I do have 3 children too, right? Right. I am going to go home at some point. But anytime you want to make it.
Are you still working on that project with the flyover? What's happening?
Yeah, looking at the options.
Okay. It's still a negotiation. Yeah.
Well, we've got to build houses for people. The aim is to build houses in the best possible way. And one of the points I've been making to communities and activist groups, the kinds of homes we build and the places we put them would be one of the biggest determinants of our planetary impact. Right. Absolutely. So again, building centrally, building more densely is there. I did actually take it to Extinction Rebellion. You have them in the United States as well, right? Big climate activist group. So it was a big climate group. They brought London to a gridlock, and I said, saying we need to save the planet is great, right? And shouting at government is easy. But going into a community where people don't want houses built in one of the most sustainable locations, that's where I'd love to see you earn your crust. Right? It's easy to shout at government. Everyone hates government, right? They're rubbish, they shouldn't get paid and all that. That's cheap activism. Go and start talking to people and say, I know you don't want houses near you, but if we don't build them here, we'll put them in a less sustainable location and that will cost the planet. So it's not just down to me to convince people. And I don't want to end up in that situation. It's not just down to me. It's up to me to get communities to talk to themselves as well. That is much more grown up place leadership.
Well, that's leadership for you. We have a number of students who are, this is my last question before we go to the audience. And we have a lot of students listening in, and I'm sure they'd be very interested to know how you decided to become a mayor. What led you to subject yourself to screaming crowd?
Well, I didn't
Yes, there
actually...
were more people working together.
I tell you, it's a funny story. So I've always been interested in politics. So my first plan in life was to join Marines, the Royal Marines over here, serve 8 years and then leave and become a member of parliament. So I got bad eyes, so I couldn't get, well, I got one of my eyes isn't up to it, so I wasn't able to join Marines. So I ended up going to development agencies and working in Washington. But I'd always been minded about politics, but I didn't know how to get into it. And I got involved with Operation Black Vote, which is in the US as well, trying to get more Black and Asian people involved in politics. And then I was looking at a parliamentary seat in this city, but then it was an all-women shortlist. So I was ruled out of being able to run for it. But then I ended up at Yale. I was on the Yale Ward Fellows Program. And while I was there, Professor David Berg, who's friends with Howard Dean, they're best friends, he said, Howard always said that being governor was more interested in being a senator. And he said to me, Marvin, I think you'd be more suited to executive politics than legislative politics. But that was 2010. We didn't have a mayor back then. Anyway, I come back to Bristol. Bristol went for a referendum on having a mayor. Bristol was the only city out of 11 that said yes. And then a friend of mine said to me, oh, you should go for that. I wasn't even really thinking about it, but she said, you should go for mayor. I put my hat in the ring for selection. I won the selection. Next thing, this rocket took off. I was on the roller coaster. So it wasn't a life plan. It kind of came along. I was there, and I lost in 2012. I lost by 5,000 votes, and I ran again in 16. Rocky 2, and I won that time.
What did you do differently the second time, or did you have more name recognition?
Well, there was a whole bunch of factors. I was actually quite. I tell you what, there was a very strong anti-party politics, pro-independent strain in 2012. So running as with the back end of a party paid a price, but I did uphold the party vote. And part of that was because of my background, single mom, poverty, mixed race, working class, and all the rest of it. So I wasn't part of the political establishment. Interestingly, the person who won on an anti-establishment ticket. He's a privately educated guy, went to university in the 1960s, he's a millionaire. Even I see this in Trump. Members of the establishment can get away with criticizing the establishment.
He's not right? Establishment, he's a crook.
But part of the money gentry, they can get, like Nigel Farage, they can get away with it without being described as having a chip on their shoulder of engaging in class war because they are the establishment. So I felt a bit put out by that, but anyway, I lost. Second time, I was much more open about my story. I didn't say much about my background in the first election, even though people knew about it, because I wanted to talk about policy. But actually, what became clear to me was that people did want to know who they were electing a lot more. And I think also there was quite a low turnout in the first election. People realized after the first term that the mayoral position mattered. And then the incumbent also had a track record. And the question was it serious politics or was it performance politics? And we came with a serious agenda around house building, poverty, childcare, and the rest of it. And anyway, I don't want to go on about my previous.
Lots of lessons there. Lots of lessons there. Of course, we must mention you're the first Black mayor in the United Kingdom. So that's very exciting. Yeah. I think we have some questions from the audience. I think, Jocelyn, you were going to send me some questions. Not seeing them. Ah, here we are. Let's see. How else has Bristol seen the benefits of its global city aspirations? What are the gains that you've seen there?
Of its, if I interpret that as the gains from us being proactive on the international stage.
Yes.
Well, Bristol's internationalism happens independently of the local authority anyway. A third, which is a remarkable fact actually, a third of the world's natural history broadcasting comes through Bristol, which is incredible. Blue Planet, Planet Earth, and all those programs you'll see. Plimsoll, which is a TV production company in the city, just sold big series to Netflix and Apple TV. So the Wallace and Gromit comes out of Bristol. So it's always been doing trade internationally as well. But I think there's been a lot of reputational benefit from the local authority working with our city partners, our universities in becoming international. And that's, so certainly we've had a voice on migration, had a voice on trade, had a voice on climate, and that's come back into the UK and enhanced our ability to speak to our national government. Whether they listen or not, that's another question, but certainly it certainly gives us more energy because we feel we have that authority that comes from genuinely interacting with global partners. But certainly we've tried to build place-to-place channels, if I can put it like that. Meeting Marty Walsh in Boston helps Bristol University link with Boston-based universities, and Bristol-based tech companies link with Boston-based tech companies. City leaders can open those channels of connectivity.
So it's globalization on the city level that you're promoting, which has great outcomes.
Yeah, globalization to be defined, but yeah, it is. And actually, can I just say, because we have an international population as well, that it's the city beginning to behave in the way that the population actually is.
Sure.
We are African, we are American, we are Asian in Bristol, but we're all Bristolians. And the city beginning to behave like that, I think, I'm not saying it's a golden moment, but it does help make Bristol a home. And
you're energizing the networks that they have within the city itself.
I hope so, yeah.
So we have a question from Lolita Jackson, a New York City's climate change diplomat. And she asks the following: do the cities that have mayors in the UK work together or share best practices on some of these challenges, particularly on climate ambitions?
We do network and work together. So it's not just mayors. So we have a mix. There are 2 mayors amongst the core cities. The others are local authority leaders. So obviously I'm directly elected. The leaders are chosen by the party with the biggest number of seats in the local government. So amongst the core cities, there's myself and Joe Anderson from Liverpool, who are mayors. So we do meet regularly as core cities. We support each other and we share best practice. I'm always a bit wary about the term best practice because when someone shows me a really good project, my question is, well, how much did it cost? I go to mayoral gatherings all the time, and these mayors would tell each other fantastic stories about something they did in the community. But fundamentally, we need more money. It's one of the challenges I've taken to C40 actually, and the World Economic Forum, that certainly with C40 and actually OSF, Mayors Migration Council, we want these great things to happen. One of the best things some of these major funders can do is bring mayors that they think are doing the right things together and put them in a room with people with billions of dollars, right? And make the connection. Because the difference between the distance between Bristol and a mass transit system that's decarbonised is about £4 billion, right? That's the difference. We don't have £4 billion. If we did it, we'd do it. And there's a business case there to be had as well. The difference between Bristol and retrofitting all the homes in the city is obviously hundreds of millions of pounds. If we could retrofit our homes to make them all zero carbon, we'd do it, but we don't have the money to do it. So if we're serious about these issues, it is about sharing best practice, and that's great, but that can too often descend into storytelling. What we need is a financial vehicle to enable cities to get stuff done. What cities have started to do and explore is how we can begin working together to begin to offer investment opportunities at scale. So
Ah,
rather than Bristol, we've talked about this in the UK. We went out and we got 100 biogas buses rather than diesel. But wouldn't it be better if we went out and bought 5,000 biogas buses in one go, benefit from economies of scale? But we need the vehicle that allows us to do that, and then we need that pot of money that allows us to make that purchase. But that's where we need financiers, we need the investors, and we need the multilateral organizations, World Economic Forum, whoever, setting up those structures that enable us to do that.
so in what kind of arena do you see this happening? How do you, I know you're a member of the World Economic Forum Council on Future of Cities, but I'm not sure that's the arena. Where do you see this happening?
I'm not 100% sure. I've just put the question out there and the task. So it is one of the work strands of the WEF board I'm sitting on now. It was, yes. I spoke over the summer, and it was one of the points I made. We need money, basically.
Right.
And now it's a work.
Right.
Yeah, so it's a work stream, which is great. I've put it on C40 as well. Again, C40 is absolutely fantastic, but I just don't want to sit around and listen to 100 mayors telling me stories about what they've done. Like, they don't want to sit around and listen to me telling stories about what I've done. Right. What they want to know is, how are we going to pay for getting what we want, what we all know should get done? We can get that on a list. We can get a top 10 list of sustainable interventions, but we need it all come with a price tag. But in Bristol, I pulled together both in local government officers, but some of the people in the city who have investors by profession. Right. And we pulled together an initial exploratory discussions. What could a vehicle look like that could go on a 10, 15, 20-year journey with the city to reconceptualize what the city is, replan it, and then actually rebuild it? What could that financial vehicle look like? So our aim is to get a bit of a sketch together and then begin sharing it with people like WEF, with people like C40, with people like MMC, core cities, Euro cities, and then seeing if we can kind of catch some interest in that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. How far along are you on that one?
Baby mountains.
Okay.
we're very much in the early stage. We know what the challenge is, right? We know what the challenge is. We know the framework, and there are some vehicles that are kind of there, but in terms of coming up with a solid vehicle yet, we don't have it. But every time I speak to people in finance, I say that this is it. And actually, even some of the companies that do consultancy and some of the companies that build infrastructure, I said, look, if you came to us, not just with your project, but with a vehicle, a model of a financial vehicle that you could work with to go on a 15-year journey with us, we'd bite your hand off. And I'm sure there are mayors around the world, because we all want solutions. And we know we cannot deliver the solutions on 2-3 year horizons. We're talking about a 15-year journey here. So hopefully that challenge is out there.
Yeah, and again, it's building trust and also understanding the motivations of each side, each group. You have to have votes and run your city. They need profits. So the question is how you can bring those all together and build that trust around those sorts of things. What's been the hardest thing you've had to do as mayor? And then tell me what the easiest thing has been.
It's difficult to know the hardest thing. The big challenge has been that we're constantly on a shrinking budget, essentially, per head every year, and it's just been one constant: where can we find money? So that's been a permanent challenge. But just, I suppose, like a heavy burden, all people who experience discrimination for their life, you're acclimatized to it, and it just becomes a norm. You forget you're carrying it around. But it would be remarkable to be in a world in which the momentum was towards increasing investment in the city. I wouldn't know which way to turn. So that's been incredibly hard. I think it's hard for me personally. That's politically hard. Hard for me personally is being in the middle of a political debate that I just think is so poor. It's appalling. I think it's just superficial, it's juvenile, it's Twitterized, it's Facebookized, it's one-dimensional, it's making an evil out of the enemy. And that's really hard to sit in the middle of. Because I think, like I said on the housing front just now, I'm not building houses because we want to destroy your community. We're building houses because we have a housing crisis and a climate crisis. If you just come and say, well, you're evil because you want to destroy my life, that's not even true. Not that I'm saying I'm not evil. You have your view, but you haven't even engaged with the argument. And I find that a real challenge. The number of times I'd love to just say, can we just sit down and have a talk about this?
Right.
And I don't have that time. And also, I don't know if I have the patience.
Well, there's ingrained polarization that has been enhanced, unfortunately, by certain politicians.
Well, and I would say journalism too. I've got a kind of a
background. That's true.
Well, I've got a tense stance with it. I heard Barack Obama being interviewed the other day, and he was talking about the circus. And so we all, I think, quite often in the public, we blame politicians for the way things are and policies. I wrote a piece when I was at the World Fellows Program. I said, politicians wouldn't be selling it if people weren't buying it. People buy anger, they buy conflict, right? They buy the soap opera, they buy the circus ticket. And actually, and I think it's a challenge for journalism. Journalism, though, it gets clicks, it gets the viewers. So actually, there are 3 people involved in this descent, right? The journalists write about, not all, there are some fantastic journalists, right? And it's a pain to me because there's such a critical sector, but I do see it sometimes. They write the conflict because they say it's what people will click on and it sells the advertising then for the product, right? People click on it and then politicians serve it up because they know that's the way they're going to get the headlines and get the profile. If you just go and say, they kind of had a point, but I subtly disagree with him, you're not going to get a headline. If you say that person is an absolute traitor to this country and so forth, you're going to get yourself a headline, you get your profile. And that's a very dangerous place. We're all taking each other, we're in a collective act of going down the political plug hole. And we all need a little bit of humility to turn that around, I think.
Well, I think you're probably one of the leaders who can do that for us in terms of turning things around. With the vision that you have for your city, with the vision that you have about how important it is to have conversations to work out problems. I like the idea of give me an offering, not just an ask. I think that's a byword that we need to convey. I think I'll turn this back to Jocelyn to round this up. I just want to thank you very much for this wonderful conversation. Hope we can have many more. And best wishes to you for your dealing with your fiscal crisis, as well as making sure that One Bristol stays on track. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much for all of those insights. I wish we had another hour to discuss it all, but we'll have to have you back, hopefully in person, so you can visit Philly again soon, Mayor Rees.
Yeah.
And thank you, Eugenie, for that conversation, and to everyone in the audience for the provocative questions. We hope to see you next week when we'll have 2 more exciting events. On Monday, we'll feature a different kind of conversation on cities and climate change, focusing on Glasgow and their hosting of COP26, or the UN climate change negotiations that were meant to be happening right now, but have been postponed until next year. But Glasgow and those around the world are still working hard on generating momentum and continuing those productive conversations and their work towards a just transition. And then our next World Today on Tuesday will feature a discussion on Kosovo-Serbia dialogues, what's next. More information on all of those and links to register are in our chat. And as always, you can find a recording of this conversation on our YouTube channel and find out about all of our upcoming events on our mailing list, or follow us on social media, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, etc. Those links are in the chat as well. And you can learn more about Perry Worldhouse's programming and all of our work on critical contemporary global affairs via our website. Thank you so much for joining us today, especially Mayor Rees and Professor Birch. Hope you all take care.